Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Alex Matos, the Executive Director at Enspyre Taipei. I'm very happy that we can be having this webinar today with some great speakers from Enspyre, Ecovis, and Wraptie, who'll be sharing their knowledge and insights on exactly how to go about opening a business if you're a foreigner here in Taiwan, and just what you should be looking out for. So before we begin, I'd like to quickly introduce our speakers. So first we'll have Elias, the co-founder of Enspyre. It's a telemarketing and teleservices company. And Elias is also an investor of many other SMEs. Enspyre has also been organizing seminars for foreign entrepreneurs since 2005. And Elias has been consulting with the government to providing feedback on legal issues regarding foreign residents for some time now. This has also led him to writing a book called How to Start a Business in Taiwan. So definitely an expert in the field. He's opened one, he's looked at the policies on it, and he's written a book about it. And for those of you who are looking at opening a business or who have opened a business, he's also the co-organizer of the annual pitch event, Dragon's Chamber, which gives foreign entrepreneurs a platform to promote their business and to get some funding. And actually, I believe Mark from Wraptie, who's one of the other speakers, he was actually one of the participants in that event, but we'll leave it to him to talk about it a bit later. Then our next speaker will be Henry Liao. He's a partner at Ecovis, which is auditing, accounting, tax, and consulting. They've been doing it for more than 20 years, and they're very experienced, having served thousands of clients to set up businesses, both local setups and foreign invested entities across a broad range of industries. I believe they have offices in Taipei, Taichung, and Yunlin, from what I saw. So all across Taiwan, they service customers from everywhere. And finally, we'll have Mark Blackburn from Wraptie, the director and co-founder of Wraptie International and the not-for-profit One Brown Planet. So he graduated from the UK as an engineer and has more than 20 years experience in manufacturing and yacht engineering and in business and development, but his real passion lies in the environment. And he's got a special interest in plastic pollution, which had led him to start this company, Wraptie, which is an environmentally friendly company. And he's done it in Taiwan. He's been through everything and he's still going through it. He's also still very active, working with the government and looking at the new incentives that they have for new businesses and for foreigners. So I'm sure he'll be able to provide some really great insights. And finally, we'll have a quick panel Q&A. So some of you have given us some questions and we'll try and go through those. And also feel free to use the chat box to ask any questions live. Throughout the presentation, feel free to ask questions, but we'll probably leave it to the end for the panel Q&A. If you want to ask a question, like I was mentioning before, there's a speech bubble at the bottom of your screen. You can press it and you can just ask questions throughout using the chat box function. So on that note, I'd like to hand it over to our first speaker, Elias, to kick it off.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for listening to this. So if you get me my first slide there. So this is our webinar, and let's jump into the next one. Next slide, please. So I'm from Sweden. No, so back one. I'm from Sweden. I just point that out because a lot of people, when they hear Sweden, they think Switzerland, and I just want to point out that they're not the same. I always say that Taiwan and Sweden share that misfortune where Taiwan gets, misplaced with Thailand all the time. Which also happens when I go back to Sweden and I tell people that I live in Taiwan and they say, oh yeah, Thailand, great beaches. Always a problem. Anyway, I've been here in Taiwan for a little bit more than 20 years. If you would go next slide, please. My third week in Taiwan back in year 2000, the first business that I worked on trying to set up was actually a laundromat. And at the time, there were only 3 laundromats in the whole of Taipei, New Taipei city area. And, I figured, because I had just come from the US where I was studying, that, I think there's going to be a need for a lot of laundromats around Taiwan. So I started working on that. Started figuring out what it would cost. I became a member of the American Coin Laundry Association, if you can believe it. And in the end, I didn't actually start this business because I needed about 3 million NT to start it, and I just couldn't figure out at the time where to go to get that kind of money or how to do it. Next slide, please. So instead, I ended up co-founding a online portal for gay and lesbian people. Now, I'm not gay and I'm not lesbian, but my friends told me at the time that this was there was a need for such a business that sold products specifically to this market and so on. And of course, with some marketing and sales skills and web building skills and so on, that was my contribution to this type of company. And eventually we sold that company with a profit, and had to figure out what else to do. Next slide, please. So what we ended up doing was to start a company called Enspyre. And actually the first company, or the first service that we offered, were phone answering services. And the reason we did that was because the previous company, the online business, we needed somebody to answer phone calls during the day because we were still working during, doing regular job during the day, and then we ran our business during the nights and weekends. So we needed somebody to answer phone calls, and we couldn't really find any good quality companies in Taiwan that would answer phone calls. And then we looked at this industry in other countries, and we saw that companies that answers phone calls for other companies are huge in countries like the UK and Sweden and the US. So we figured, well, this must be a good idea to do here in Taiwan. We can dominate this business, and with Taiwan having so many SMEs, we should be able to really make a lot of money. But we were very, very wrong. We had tooled up our office, we had bought a a phone system, and we hired on people, just to find after a few months that the majority of the Taiwanese bosses are really not that keen on outsourcing. They really prefer to hire on their own secretary and have them sitting in the office and doing the job there. So that was one of the first examples that I had of where you're making an assumption about the Taiwan market, the Taiwan culture, and so on, based on what you're seeing in other countries, and that probably or isn't always the case, right? Just because something works somewhere else, it might not work here in Taiwan. So what to do? I mean, we already had the office, we had the phone system, we had a bunch of people that were sitting there waiting to answer phone calls. Well, it was actually one of our customers who said, well, Elias, why don't you also start helping us to make outbound phone calls? That way you can help us get more customers that then can call us, so that you have more phone calls for us to answer. That made sense. So we started making outbound calls. And usually when I do this in front of a live audience, I would ask everybody to hold up their hand if they ever received a telemarketing phone call, which nearly everybody has. And then I ask people, okay, keep your hands up if you enjoyed it, which no one ever does. But we only do B2B telemarketing. So we call to companies on behalf of companies. So, we have companies like Oracle and eBay and, all the big IT companies that we help to find more customers here in Taiwan. And then in later years, we've also added some digital marketing. Next slide, please. So this is our team. This is our office. We are a whole bunch of people who are making a lot of phone calls and a lot of online ads and all of that stuff every day. We make about 5,000 phone calls per day out of this office. So, our phone bill is accordingly. Um, most of my employees are all local people. We have one French dude and myself who are not born in this country, but all the rest of them are local people. And that also has its own challenges when it comes to culture, or even language. When I started my business back in Enspyre in 2002, honestly my Chinese wasn't very good, um, and that has had both its benefits and the drawbacks. The benefits, of course, is that our company does, we speak a lot, right? We're making phone calls, we're answering calls, and so on. And that's something that I just couldn't do by myself. So from day one, I had to figure out, how do I manage people to do something as opposed to jumping in and doing it themselves, which I think is something that a lot of bosses, I mean, I'm not saying that you shouldn't do anything, you shouldn't make your employees do something that you wouldn't do yourself, but at the same time, a lot of bosses kind of gets bogged down in more working in the business as opposed to on the business. They kind of get stuck in the minutia of things. So that's us, a good little group of people. All right, next slide, please. And we have a excellent CPA coming up and talking later about how you actually go about starting a business. But when I started Enspyre, I had no one that could help me, and I didn't even know that I could really go out and ask people for help. But then in 2005, I organized what I think was the very first event in Taiwan ever for foreign entrepreneurs. I figured we might have 20, 30 people show up, and in the end, I think we had 127. So obviously, there were always a lot of, foreigners, foreign residents in Taiwan who were interested in starting a business and how to do it and how to create, their own future in Taiwan and so on. And that led to my next step. Next slide, please. So in 2010, I was on my way back to Sweden for Christmas, and in the airport there was a bookstore, and in the bookstore there was a whole shelf full of books called How to Start a Business in Thailand. And it just struck me, why on earth don't we have a book like that in Taiwan, right? Every person I meet keeps on having the same questions over and over again. What kind of entities can I start? How do I get my visa from my business? How much money do I need to invest? Where do I find an office, and so on and so on and so on. So when I came back to Taiwan a few weeks later, I assembled a group of interns, and we started doing research about all the rules and regulations. And eventually we wrote this book, How to Start a Business in Taiwan. And it came out in 2012. So it's been a while in the market, but I would say it's probably about 90% still accurate. There's a few things like entrepreneur visa and so on that have come out later that is not mentioned in the book, but the great majority of it is still valid. And I think one of the reasons why thousands of people have bought the book and enjoy it is because the government tend to only show you facts. And what I worked for a year on trying to do is to put rules and regulations in a context to kind of explain how an issue like the business entity and your visa actually relates to each other. So that's kind of what that book is about. Next slide, please. Now, one of the reasons why I spend so much time on events and so on that has to do with foreign entrepreneurs has to do with, for example, these three companies. Now, what do they have in common? Well, all of these three companies are American companies co-founded by a Taiwanese American, somebody who was born here in Taiwan, left, became a foreigner in the US and eventually a citizen over there, I guess, and they co-founded these companies. Now, what the heck would the US be without their immigrants? And then we can ask ourselves, well, what about Taiwan? Does Taiwan have any famous, successful, foreigners that have started businesses here? Well, next slide, please. Now, there are literally thousands and thousands of foreigners that have started businesses in Taiwan. And I can't mention them all, but I can just give some examples. Now, up in the top left there, you see a Swedish guy called Roger. He owns a company called the SHL Group, and they have more than 3,000 employees in Tainan. In Taoyuan. And usually when I mention Roger to Taiwanese government employees and so on, they are absolutely blown away that a foreigner can come to this country and start a company that become that big. But it's true. Somebody else, Revital, maybe some of you know her. She's very active in many of the business circles. She runs a business that helps tech companies from many countries to come to Taiwan and set up here and in China, in Korea, and so on. John Kellenberger, another well-known face in the foreign community. He helps Taiwanese schools to recruit English teachers around the world. And have any of you ever tried the Kavalan whiskey? World famous Taiwanese whiskey. Well, did you know that the design and the logo and so on for this very famous Taiwanese whiskey was made by the two gentlemen up in the top right corner there, who owns a design company called Subkarma. And the big group picture there is just to illustrate exactly how many foreign entrepreneurs there are in this country. So Taiwan attracts a lot of cool people, and we deserve the best here too, because we are bringing a lot of abilities to Taiwan. Next slide, please. Now I'm gonna maybe touch on a few of the things that I think that Henry will talk about, but a few of the things that I think makes Taiwan a good place to own a business if you're a foreign resident. You can own 100% of a business. In many countries in Asia or around the world, that's not true, right? In many countries, a foreigner can only own less than 50%. There is, technically speaking, no paid-in capital limit, right? So if you already have your visa, ordered, so you don't need a visa from your company, well then, the amount of money that you need to invest to start a business is very low. Third one, I think, is probably one of the most important, right? We all know Taiwan is a great place to live, and that certainly should not be discounted, because running a business is hard, and we need to have, as good of a life as we can. I've been here for 20 years. I've been doing business here for nearly that long, and I have personally never run into a situation where I've been asked for bribes or such surprises. Now, it doesn't say it doesn't exist, but it's very uncommon. And then, of course, we have a strong international business community like this, chamber events we have today. But it also has a very growing and startup community. There are incubators and accelerators all over the place where most of the events are in English. And I would encourage all of you to also look into organizations like the Startup Stadium, MOX, the mobile-only accelerator, Taiwan Startup Arena, and so on and so on. And then another thing I want to mention is that, Taiwan used to be known as the place that made all the stuff, right? The computers and the phones and everything, and to some extent it still is. And if you have a product idea, Taiwan is a fantastic place to develop hardware products. I've done that. I've invested in companies that done that. So don't forget about that in all the service economy that we are working on. Next slide, please. And not everything is great. there are huge challenges in being a foreigner in Taiwan and being a foreign entrepreneur specifically. Taiwanese banks really don't like foreigners, and it's getting worse. It's getting harder and harder to do banking services here, and you know, this is something that I have spent a lot of time talking to the government about and talking to many banks about. If you have a problem setting up a bank account, um, don't give up. Okay, the problem is that most banks are so incredibly ignorant about what the rules and regulations are when it comes to foreigners. So argue a little bit and then just move on to the next branch. Hopefully eventually you run into a branch manager or you know, somebody in the bank who actually knows what the laws are and knows that you can do business here. Telecoms sometimes have problems too. We know that some telecoms are charging extra, you know, deposits and so on. And you know, it's not always easy to you know, live here in terms of the residency and so on. You know, a lot of people are still running into the problems where they are registering a business and then the second year in business they can't get enough revenues and they ending up having troubles. But most of those things are still possible to work around. So you know, if you are running into problems, I suggest that you turn to the business community and to people like the speakers here today and so on, and ask how they have solved the problems, and in most cases we can solve them. So I would, you know, say that definitely the good outweighs the bad, and wish everybody good luck. That's the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Alex, I think you're on mute.
Sorry, thank you, Henry. So I was just saying, this is Elias's email and his website. So if you're interested in finding out more about the business or talking to him a little bit more, feel free to reach out to him.
Yeah.
So now we'll pass it over to Henry.
All right, thank you, Alex. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, and thank you, Elias, for your very interesting sharing of experience. I think I'm going to talk about the part where it's a little bit less interesting, a bit technical side of how to open up a business. But I think it's important to know. I think Elias has pointed out a lot of, sorry. So I think Elias has pointed out a lot of good and bad of how to start a business, and I'll talk into a bit more detail on that. So next slide, please. All right, so as Alex has introduced, I'm a partner at Ecovis Taiwan, and we're a CPA firm. I've been in helping foreigners to set up business in over 10 years now. So I've experienced a lot of things that foreigners would face when the difficulties or the processes that need to go through to get your business started. So today I'm going to talk about some of the why, the how, the what, the where of how to set up your business. So first I'll talk about why you would be setting up a business in Taiwan, talking about the advantages that you may face, and how to, when you want to start a business, you first need to, of course, have a visa to come to Taiwan. So Taiwan has introduced an entrepreneur visa, which is quite good, I think, in a way. If you have not obtained a residency visa here in Taiwan. And then I'll talk a little bit more detail of what type of company you can set up and where you're going to set up the business, which is the business registration. Elias talked about what some of the issues that you may face, how much capital you need, what are the registration processes, and how we can do to help. All right, next slide, please. Okay, so why set up a business in Taiwan? I mean, of course, I think some of you may be in Taiwan, some of you may have not come to Taiwan but are interested to come. I think one of the key advantages, as Elias had said, you can own 100% of the company, and there's no minimum capital requirement, although the rules does dictate that you need the least amount to cover your initial cost. So I would say 50,000 to 100,000 NT dollars would be enough to start to as a capital, to register your capital in Taiwan. But do bear in mind that capital needs to be remitted into the bank account of your company before you can actually set it up. And those capital needs to be audited by a CPA to make sure that the capital has been remitted and is in the company. It's not used for some other purposes. One of the other key advantages are the taxes. The income tax rate for a corporation or a business entity is 20%. Well, it's not as low as Singapore or Hong Kong. However, if you compare to other countries like Japan or other Asian countries, I think it's relatively competitive. The next two, I think, sort of tax benefits that the Taiwanese government has, I just list out some of the few. For example, if you start a business and you have some, when you start, you have some research and development expenses, there are 15% that you can credit against your income tax liability. So that's one of the good things if you have R&D expenses. And then when you import some machinery that is not manufactured in Taiwan, you can get a tariff-free treatment when you import it. So just to list some of the few things that some tax advantages, the common one that you can get when you start a business in Taiwan, and that can go against your income tax or your tariff. All right, next slide, please. So just talk about before you start your business, you have to come into Taiwan. So a lot of people come to Taiwan using their travel visa, which is for mere tourist purposes or such. So you have to leave once every 3 months or you know, and then come back. So I think one of the thing that the Chinese government saw, which was introduced a few years ago, that they have an entrepreneurship visa, which allows you to come into Taiwan with 1 year residency, and you don't have to come in and out all the time. So you get a more stable living here in Taiwan before you actually set up your company. There are some eligibility that you have to have. So for example, some of the eligibility that we list out is that you need to get a domestic or foreign venture capital that invest in you for $2 million. If you have that proof that you have got an investment from a venture capitalist or from a crowdfunding platform, they can accept that as one of the criteria for you to get your entrepreneurship visa. Or if you're participating in an approved entrepreneurial accelerator or incubator, which is usually set up by the local city government. So for example, the new Taipei city government or the Taipei city government has a accelerator or incubator place where if you rent a place over there and want to start your business, if you can prove that you have done that, then you're also eligible for this entrepreneurship visa. Or if you hold patents overseas and you want to come to Taiwan, use your patent to start a business, you can also apply for this visa. Or you have won some design competitions that's internationally known, like the Red Dot, the IF design, and you can also apply for it. Or one of the last one is that if you have already invested, if an entrepreneur has already invested $1 million, and you know, if you're not on your working visa, you don't have any other visa status, but you still want to stay in Taiwan to work on your business, then you can also apply for this kind of entrepreneur visa. So this visa can also be extended after 1 year, but there are further criteria that you need to comply with. But anyway, before you start, this is something that you should know. You can use or apply for. Right. Next slide, please. Okay, so going into the type of structures that you want to set up. So in Taiwan, I just listed out some of the most common structures. First one is a sole proprietorship, or sometimes can be a partnership as well. This is on an individual level where you don't set up a separate legal entity. So you work as a person, but you have a business entity registration. The liability are unlimited. So therefore, this is less used, especially for foreigners. A company structure is actually more used. So the company can be a company limited by shares, or just a limited company, which is limited by capital. So this is the company structure, corporate structure is a limited liability. And the difference between a company limited by shares and a limited company is that company limited by shares is usually for for companies with more shareholders, usually more than 3 shareholders. Then they may start to choose a structure like company limited by shares. But if your company is 100% owned by yourself, then we will mostly suggest you just choose a limited company, which has a less easier, simpler structure. Okay. So a corporation, this is the most common one that if any foreign individual would like to start a business here in Taiwan. So there are some companies outside of Taiwan, or if you already have a company in places in your own or in your own country, or if you set up like a holding company in Hong Kong, Singapore, for example, you can choose to set up a branch office or representative office here in Taiwan. And the difference between branch and representative office is that representative office is not allowed to perform any business operation activity, I suppose. They're allowed to hire people to perform some work for the parent company to sort of as a liaison office. However, it's not allowed to have its own business activity. The branch office is allowed to have its own revenue and have its own business activity. And I suppose the branch office, the difference between a branch office and a company, which is set up locally, is that the liability does go back to the parent. So if you have a Hong Kong company or a Singapore company, if there's any liability bound by the branch office, the parent company in Hong Kong and Singapore will still be liable. So I think the legal side of it is one of the big difference. There are also some tax differences between a company that's set up locally and a branch. In Taiwan, taxes, I just mentioned the corporate income tax is 20%. But after you pay for the corporate income tax, when you have dividends to distribute to your shareholders, there's another tax on the dividend. So if it's a company, then if you're a foreign tax resident, then you have an extra 21% tax. If it's a branch office, there will be no dividend tax on the profit that you remit back to the parent. So there are still some differences tax-wise, but the legal implication, I think, is the most important part when you want to decide how to select the correct structure. All right, next slide, please. So where are you going to set up the business? I think that's, Elias also talked about this. I think the business register address is very important, especially if you have not rented an office or you have not, you're just, starting your business, you're making working from home or you don't have an exact business place to register. Or if you're starting a restaurant, if you're starting a, food and beverage business or retail business, then it's very important to know where you register your business, because there are a lot of zoning and building regulations that you need to comply with. So I had clients who didn't know about these kind of rules and just set up the restaurant and then spend a lot of money on the renovation. And then when they came to us, they told us that the city government came to them and said they have to move, right? So they spend maybe $1 or $2 million on the renovation already, but they had to move their restaurant because they were registered or the actual place of business is at a wrong district or wrong zoning that is not allowed to operate as a restaurant. So this is something that you need to be aware of before you actually start registering. So it's quite important, especially for restaurant or gyms or those businesses that might have some extra building or zoning regulation that you need to comply with. But if you're just doing a sort of a trading company, a B2B business, then the restrictions are less. But still, that's one of the most important part that you need to be aware of when you want to set up your business address. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so how much capital do you need? So although there is no minimum requirement of the capital, as we've spoken before. However, if you do not have a visa and you want to work here in Taiwan legally, suppose you have to have a work visa, and to have a work visa, and then you would then be able to apply for a residency card, which is the ARC. To get the work visa, you need at least $500,000 as capital. If you're applying the work visa as a manager position for your company, then you need at least half $500,000 Taiwan dollars as capital to apply for your first work permit. However, if you're not registered as a manager position for the company, and you're just or you're hiring a separate person, a separate foreigner to work for you, then you need at least 5 million as capital to apply for a foreign professional to work here in Taiwan. So most of our clients, they would start their business with $500,000 capital and apply for a work permit for themselves, and using the $500,000 capital requirement, and they might get 2 to 3 years work permit visa, in which they would then be able to get their residency card, and they'll be able to stay in Taiwan. Okay, and the third one is if you want to apply for a resident visa, not by work permit, but actually by investment, then there is a rule where you can invest at least $200,000, roughly 6 million NT dollars. And then once that investment is done, then you may be able to apply for a resident visa with other criteria to be met. But there is also another way to acquire your residency here in Taiwan. So this is just related to capital. All right. So just to give you a brief outline of how you should register your company. So one very important part is to have a Chinese name. So in Taiwan, you cannot, like Hong Kong or Singapore, to register a company under English name. So you have to have a Chinese name. So we have to, and it cannot be duplicated. You can have the same name basically as other companies that has been registered. So you have to reserve the name and also make sure that you're not using some other company's name. There are a part where you need to notarize, or there are some documents you need to notarize when you apply for foreign investment approval, which is one of the most hectic process, I suppose, for foreigners. The notarizing, if you're in Taiwan, you can go to, if you're an individual, you can go to a notary public. But if you're a company, if you're investing as a company, as a foreign company, then there are more process that you have to do back in your home country, where document needs to be legalized or notarized before it can be sent over to Taiwan and to apply for foreign investment approval. And the foreign investment approval takes 7 to 14 days, but now, because depending on how much workload they have, sometimes it does get a little bit longer than 2 weeks. But depending on, of course, the investment amount, also the sort of the industry that you're going to, so that would also depend on those two, the length of the application to be approved. All right. When you apply for a foreign investment approval, at the same time, one of the most important part is to open a bank account. Because once your investment approval is done, you need to open a bank account. Before your company is set up, the capital needs to be remitted into the bank account. So this is the one of the, again, the hectic process that you have to go through, is to open the bank account. So Elias has spoken about how hard it is for banks to know the rules for foreigners to actually open a bank account. That's very true. That's very true. So one of our what we help the client is to find the right bank and who has experience in opening up a bank account for foreigners, and that's much easier to go through, to actually, for you to go to any bank, and go in and say you want to open a bank account, then you will have to stay there for 3 or 4 hours, and you may not even have your bank account set up. So that's one of the most important part, I think, to actually know which bank knows how to do the process is very important. So once the bank account is set up, you have to remit your capital from a foreign account into the Taiwan bank account. And that bank account will be a preparatory office account, which means that the company is not set up. So it's a preparatory office account. The money will go in there before the company is set up. And that capital needs to be verified by CPA and approved by the Foreign Investment Commission. Then we will go after that is done, then you have your investment approval, then you will then go on for the company registration. The company registration is the one where if all the document is completed, then it could take very 5 days or even less. If you have all your documents prepared, that the company registration can be approved at the spot when you do the application. But it is all the processes before this comparison that's taking a long time. So that's why usually it would take, from experience, 2 months for you to set up the business. So I think we are trying to also, talking to the Chinese government, trying to let them know what it is that is taking so long for the foreigners to start. Although the government would always think that the company registration is very fast. That's very true. However, the processes before is the one where you have to, be aware of. Okay. Next slide, please. All right, so just to very briefly what we can do to help as a CPA firm, as our experience to work with foreign clients, we can consult and advise you what's the most efficient structure. We can help you to register your name. We can help you to prepare and submit the required documents, to find the right corporate structure, draft the articles of association. If you have more shareholders, the shareholders agreements, etc. We can arrange for tax registration. We can do the bank introduction if you need. Okay, next slide. All right, I hope I'm doing okay with the time. It's my last slide. Once your company is set up, you do require accounting and tax compliance work that you need to do to make sure that your company is compliant with all the accounting and tax regulation. So, because time is limited today, but if you have any questions regarding tax and accounting or payroll or things like that, once you start your business, you want to hire people, you can also come and contact us and to ask us any questions that you may have. All right. Thanks. Thank you. Okay. That'll conclude my presentation.
Great. Thank you, Henry. I think I got a bit of an echo. So if anyone would like to contact Henry or Ecovis, their email and their website's on the screen, so feel free to contact them. I think, Henry, you pointed out something very interesting story was about your friend who opened a restaurant and then he ended up having to move locations. And I think that really highlights that, you do hear a lot of horror stories about people who just start a business, start doing something, and then later find out they've made a mistake. So I think that really highlights that it's important that if you're really serious about starting a business, that you should really talk to, a company like Ecovis, an accountant who can help you walk you through the process, just so that you know what you're going into before you even begin and how to go about it, so you don't make any mistakes, end up spending $1 million and then it being for nothing. So if you're really serious, I think it's before you've even begun or even starting your business, you should definitely talk to an accountant or Ecovis. Before you do so. Okay, so next, let's check my side. We have Mark Blackburn. So he's the director and co-founder of Wraptie. So he's a foreigner here in Taiwan who's opened up a business, a successful business. He'd probably say otherwise, but I would say very successful. So Mark, how long have you been in Taiwan? And can you tell us a little bit about your company, Wraptie? Because I haven't really said much. So I'll leave it to you to talk about.
Okay, no problem. So thanks everybody, and thanks Alex for organizing everything as per normal. Excellent. So my name is Mark Blackburn. I'm I guess a British Australian, born in Sydney, and I moved here to Taiwan about 4 years ago now. I live here with my wife, who is Taiwanese, Australian, and I actually only started the company about 3 years ago. So I had 1 year in Taiwan, deciding whether I liked the place, thinking about what to do with my life. I found that the kind of the entrepreneurial startup culture in Taiwan kind of really encouraged me to do something for myself. Living in Australia and working in Australia, this kind of entrepreneurial culture doesn't really exist. It's kind of it's a lot easier to get a real job, let's call it, in Australia. It's career progression's a lot easier. It's a lot easier to know, 5 years from now, I'll be a manager in this, 10 years from now, hopefully I'll be like a regional manager, et cetera, et cetera. Taiwan, certainly for foreign people, those kind of career progressions are a lot more obscure. it's a lot slower. And I know working for Taiwan companies can be a lot more difficult in terms of how many hours you work in regards to how much you get paid. So certainly starting a company in Taiwan makes a lot more sense than it does in Australia. The other reason why I started a company in Taiwan, Taiwan, probably not many people realize this, but is one of the leading countries in the world, even more so than China, in manufacturing recycled materials. So actually recycling the materials and then making those materials into products. And all of the products that we make in Wraptie are made from recycled materials. Doing something sustainable really was the driving force for me starting Wraptie, and being in Taiwan's kind of helped me to do that. So yeah, 3 years, and we're still going.
So doing very well. I'm actually curious, what's your business setup right now? Like, are you, Henry was just talking about, we have companies, we have branch offices, we have representative offices. So what is your business model right now?
So we are a Taiwan company, so we're based here. I am the Fuzeren, so I represent the company. And I have a business partner, Paul, who sits in Australia, and he's an equal equity partner with the Taiwan business. We also have an Australian company, which is completely independent. The Australian company we use mainly for engineering and support services, and all the manufacturing, marketing, business kind of services go through Taiwan. You could argue that it's a multinational company. I'm not so sure the dollar value recognizes that, but yeah, so we are a local Taiwanese company.
That's amazing. And what have you seen so far have been like the real positives for you opening a business here in Taiwan?
Big positive, starting a business in Taiwan is cheap. Much, much cheaper than in Australia. I don't have much experience in the UK, but much, much cheaper. And the entrepreneurial culture here is much, much more open to, people starting companies. I'm only going to go on the website and I could go to probably 10 different entrepreneur groups and chat to people in the same kind of situation as me.
Yeah, 100%. Like, I mean, events like today, and I mean, All Hands runs a lot of events, for the foreign community, both in employment and businesses. The Canadian Chamber does a lot of things in that as well. So a lot of the chambers are doing a lot of work in this space. And I think also, people like yourself, people like Elias, who have opened businesses, everyone seems pretty open to talk about it and to share their experience. So yeah, that's definitely, I see that too, a really big positive about opening a business in Taiwan. So we've had a whole bunch of negatives just then about the bad things, the banking, the telecom, and that's not just for businesses, that's also for normal people, who aren't opening a business, just day-to-day people. It's terrible. But what are your big negatives that you've had so far when, in opening a business here in Taiwan?
The big negatives, I mean, banking really is just terrible. I mean, just to give you an example, we do a lot of e-commerce. E-commerce, you can't actually connect outside of this country in any currency other than Taiwan dollars. People don't like to buy things in Taiwan dollars. So the only way you can do it is to use PayPal, which doesn't really work in this country. So there's a lot of challenges with the banking system. Anyway, outside of banking, the main challenge really is cultural and language based. So Taiwan's a different country. They have a very different culture and they have a very different language. A lot of people do speak English, and a lot of the government websites are or do have English, but it's certainly not the main language. It's definitely not set up in a way, for example, Australia, where you could go on a website and there'd be 3 or 4 different languages to choose from, and they would all be exactly the same website. Over here, a lot of the government websites and banking websites, they actually take you to a completely different website with lots of things missing. So as an English, typically if you don't speak Chinese, it's English. If English is the language you use to communicate, it can be quite tricky. And the culture is quite different. It's a very much Confucius culture, I guess. So there's a lot of respect for elders, which is granted, but there's not necessarily a lot of respect for young people who are doing really good things. And there's maybe too much respect for older people who haven't done very good things, but that's just really, that's the culture we live in, and that's what you just have to work with. So as a young person with a successful business, you may not get the respect that you feel you might deserve.
Yeah, I think that was a very interesting point that you've made out, that I think we all experience, not just opening our own business, but if you're working in Taiwan or if you're just living in Taiwan, there is a great respect for the elders, which is great. But of course, sometimes that can work the other way, where there's lack of respect for younger people, even if they're being quite successful. Very interesting point. And finally, before we go into our Q&A, do you have any tips for any budding entrepreneurs who are looking to open up a business in Taiwan? Maybe some things that you did poorly, and then you're saying, don't do this. That you can give.
Yep. I guess the main thing as a business owner, as a startup business owner, is money. When you come to Taiwan as a foreign person, you're going to find it very difficult to source finances, either through the banking or from the government. The government naturally is going to prioritize local people, which it should do. It's a local city governments. They're also going to prioritize IT, hardware and software. So if you're not a local person or in IT, hardware and software, you're going to find yourself in the second division. The banks really don't want to talk to you. So it's really important that you have a financial strategy or funding planned before you think about starting up a business. It's super important.
Could I butt in there for a second?
Yeah, please do.
Elias here. So after 20 years in Taiwan, I was able to take out a bank loan earlier this year for the first time, or my company did. I am the guarantor, and there is no Taiwanese people involved. And I felt like I had to go out and celebrate with a beer or two. So yes, it's possible. Actually, another friend of mine who runs a language school was just approved for a 500,000 NT loan. So, especially now in the Corona times, actually the banks are I think, a bit more open to lending money than they have been in the past. But not easy.
Yeah, I think definitely something to highlight is, while it can be done, it doesn't happen a lot. So this is a rare case. But let's move straight into the Q&A. We have a whole lot of questions. We don't have a lot of time. So just quickly, one that someone submitted beforehand, and this is touching on how much capital that you need to get a work permit. So someone asked a question that's saying that they have 2 foreign co-founders, and it requires 5 million NT capital to get work permits. I think, Henry, you mentioned that before. They said they don't have anything close to that amount. Is there any other way they can go about getting the appropriate work permits?
Okay, I'll jump into that first. Basically, the rules dictates that there's only one position for the manager position if you're using $500,000 to start up your company. Then you can at least apply for a work permit for one of the. I think the question is 2 co-founders, right? So
correct.
At least one of the co-founder. The second co-founder, there may be some issues, especially when you started. There are some, the rules are not particularly, let me say, there are some leeways where you can try to apply and present your case to the Labor Department. And there are, even if you don't fit exactly all the criteria, there are still some ways where you can try and negotiate with them. However, the rules are there. There are some other type of visa, like the entrepreneurship visa, which I mentioned about. So that's also some of the other way that you can at least acquire a visa, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you have the right to work, although there is a gray area in Taiwan in terms of whether you're working or not working when you're holding an entrepreneurship visa. But anyway, there may still be ways, but we do have to talk in more detail to see what there are some other options that you may have, or there's still some negotiation that it can be done with the Labor Department. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you made an interesting point, but there's a lot of areas of gray. And I think you find that a lot with Taiwan regulation that, you know, things aren't always very black and white.
That is true. That is true. So because and one of the things is a lot of the entrepreneur visa was introduced by the Ministry of Economics, but working visa is approved by the Ministry of Labor. So the two departments, they don't necessarily talk exactly to each other in the way that we want them to. So so that's why because the entrepreneur visa, I think the idea is for them to work here and to start their business, right? So supposedly they should be able to work, but it's not, the Labor Department may not have the same view as the Ministry of Economics. So that's why we have to really look at the situation and try to negotiate with the government agency as well.
Yeah, so again, it's why it's really good to talk to a company like Ecovis who can kind of help you work through this kind of legislation nightmare. So we have another question here. Maybe this is probably from Mark. Do you have any good alternatives for receiving payments, you know, besides PayPal as an e-commerce company? Good alternatives to receiving PayPal as an e-commerce company.
Yeah, so there's no perfect solution. There are, so for example, we use Shopify as our back end for transactions. And there's two ways. I'm talking about international orders. So locally, there's quite a lot of options. You can do things like 7-Eleven, or there's a whole heap of Taiwanese kind of transactional things you can do. If you're talking about exporting and getting international orders, there's only two ways to do it. One way is to use a Taiwan dollar account, and then you get a third party to connect you to a credit card. So for example, we used a company called, I forget what they're called, I can tell you later. But we use a company to connect us to the credit card platform. But in that situation, we have to do the transaction in Taiwan dollars. After a lot of experiment, we found that people didn't like to use that. You know, for example, if you want to buy $100 US component or product, that then becomes 3,000 NT dollars, and it scares a lot of people off when they go to the checkout. If you want to use a US dollar transaction, your limitation is PayPal. PayPal charges a lot of money, but that's the limitation with using US dollar. The third alternative, which is not something that we do, is to move your e-commerce store offshore, for example, to Hong Kong, or even your home country. Obviously, because you've moved it offshore, you'll be subject to tax rules in those countries for income, and not Taiwan. So there's no perfect solution. It really depends on what you're happy with.
Great, thank you. So Vicky had a question. So Vicky was asking more about what banks would know how to deal with foreigners. And Elias had replied that some local banks like Yushan and Isan Bank, they're quite good, but it really depends on the branch. So do you guys have any recommendations of what branches specifically you've used that you think are quite good?
I mean, I would tend to second Elias. I mean, the Isan have been very good. They've actually got an English website, a new English website as well, which is really, really good. But the same way, I mean, I could go to the branch on one day and nobody will know what I'm talking about, and I find the right person the next day, and then we're in luck. So really, it's about trying to find the right person, getting their contact details, and just talking to that person. But in general, Isan have been the best.
I have met with representatives for 3 or 4 banks over the years. Latest was one bank that called me up in my office 3 weeks ago and said, "Hi, can you help us find more foreign customers?" And I said, "Well, come over and let's talk about it." And I sat her down and I explained to her all the challenges that foreigners are facing in Taiwan. And she was shocked. She says, "No, but that's not how it is in our bank." And I says, "Well, I can guarantee you that's how it is in your bank." And I said, okay, if you really do want foreign customers, you go back and talk to your boss and everything. And if you really want to go after foreign customers, you come back to me and I will help you. But that help will include training for your staff. Well, they have never called me back. So, you know, at the end of the day, you know, foreigners just scare them. So I would just say you're just gonna have to go branch by branch until you happen to find the right person. And of course, I'm sure, you know, somebody like Henry, he has connections with a specific person maybe he can introduce you to. And, you know, to some extent, I would be able to do the same thing. I mean, if you introduce them to a person that they already dealing with me, for example, you know, then you know, they've kind of gone through all of the troubles once or twice, and hopefully they haven't been completely scared for taking it on the second time. But so no, I don't think it matters too much per bank. It really is the people that you happen to run into.
Yeah. Just to add on that, it is very true. I think because they don't have a particular specific person that you dedicated for foreigner for banking matters. And one day if you go in there, you see this person. The next day you may not see the same person. But maybe to the bank's defense, sometimes for local people it's the same. So even I was helping a client to remit to go to the bank to do some banking matters. I stayed there for 4 hours. Right, I'm a local, so sometimes it happens, and I know it's particularly difficult, even more difficult for foreigners. So that's why we try to work with the same bank every time we introduce a client to them, or we try to work with banks that has at least English version of their internet banking. So after the bank account is open, you don't have to work with. You know, on a daily basis, you can use the online portal on an English, at least it's an English portal that you can work with. So yeah, there are really some difficulties when with the banks here in Taiwan.
Yeah, I really like that.
Just with these, if you're thinking of doing e-commerce, you've really got to check before you select the bank whether your e-commerce platform will actually connect to the bank. Classic example is PayPal. It only connects with one bank in the whole of Taiwan. So if you're not with eSun Bank, you're not using PayPal. That's as simple as that. So you really got to check how your store connects before you select your bank. So.
Yeah, definitely pays to do your research before you move in. And I really liked Mark's point where it's also about not just the branch but the person. So if you find that person that you think is really helpful, you know, get their name, get their contact, and you know, always try and find that person, because that's what I do as well. When we do our banking, you know, there's this one person who seems to know everything, so I always try and find her, and she's the most helpful. So probably have time for a couple more questions. Someone's asked, can I start a business as a sole proprietor at home and incorporate once it is profitable? And what are the disadvantages of doing this?
Okay, I'll jump on that first. Basically, in Taiwan, there is a threshold for registering your business. The initial threshold is 80,000 Taiwan dollars per month. So if you earn less than 80,000 Taiwan dollars per month, you don't necessarily have to register. If you start an e-business, for example, online, you're selling things that it's less than 80,000. You're making 80,000 revenue, not in profit, but in revenue. You don't have to start registering your business, so you can start there. Once you exceed that, they will expect you to register a business, but you can register as a small. If you register as a small proprietorship, and you can register as a small proprietorship, which has the definition is less than $200,000 of revenue per month. And then what happens is you still have to pay tax on that, but the tax is quite minimum, and they will send you a tax bill, so you don't have to make a tax return. They will send you a tax bill every quarter and once a year, so you just have to pay on that. But you do have to make a registration after you start making more than $80,000 and less than $200,000. If you do exceed $200,000 per month, then that's the time where you have to incorporate actual official business, either as a sole proprietor or as a company. and you will start have to lodge your tax returns every 2 months for VAT and every month for income tax. So I think just be aware of the threshold, $80,000, $200,000, then you can start from there.
Thank you, Henry. And maybe we'll just have just one more question. What are some of the advantages or disadvantages for a local resident having in opening a business, that a local resident has in opening a business? So I'm assuming that's for a Taiwanese person compared to a foreigner. I'm not quite sure. Maybe we'll skip that one. Wait, one last question here. It's about visas though, so I'm not sure if you'll be able to answer it. But it's at the moment. Oh, sorry. At the moment, he doesn't count it. So he's got a question regarding visas at the moment. He doesn't count with a proper visa, but he's trying to open a company. Going through this 2-month process, and my current landing visa expires. Is it possible to apply for extension or similar so I can finish the whole process? So I'm guessing this is Ignacio. He's been affected by COVID. So he's in Taiwan on a landing visa. He's going through this 2-month process of opening a business. Is it possible for him to get some sort of extension? I'm not sure if you'll be able to answer this one, but if you can try.
If I'm not sure, maybe Elias and Mark or Alex knows better. I think the government just extended, because of COVID-19, they just extended the another extra month. Is that correct? For because of COVID-19, for foreigners to stay, even your landing visa that does expire.
Correct.
Right. So I'm not sure whether that would help in his situation, that he can stay another extra month, even. Is that
maybe for Ignacio, you'd probably have to speak to the immigration department about this one specifically, a little bit of a specific question. And finally, before we go, one last one. Someone asked previously, would Ecovis be too big or costly for a startup? So if there's a startup in Taiwan who's looking to get your services, will you be too expensive for them?
No, we're not the big four, so we work with a lot of entrepreneurs, startups, companies, either local, both local or foreign investors. So we work a lot with small, medium-sized businesses, and that is one of our focus. I think which differentiate us with the big four accounting firms. We are a global network. We have offices around 80 countries, over 80 countries in the world. But we do a lot of SMEs, so I think that's one of our biggest focus as well. So yeah, I think we're quite friendly in terms of price and our service.
If I may chime in for a second.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, I advise anybody to buy our book and everything, and you know, there are people that have gone through the whole process of setting up their own business. Just by reading our book, but I wouldn't actually advise that, because I think that you know, reading up and being educated is good, and you take the questions that you get from doing your homework, and then you go and work with a professional, because it's just gonna be done faster, better. There's a lot of running around to do. There's a lot of documents that needs to be done in a specific way, and so on. So that would be my advice. That's, you know, it's, yes, you can save a little bit of money by doing it yourself, but you're just going to spend more time, and you know, you could put that time into building your business as opposed to, you know, trying to duplicate something that somebody like Henry knows how to do, you know, 10 times better than you would ever be able to do.
Thank you, Elias. Yeah, so I think that's a really good point. You know, if you're really interested in opening a business in Taiwan, you know, go to all the networking events you can go to, you know, watch all the webinars you can, buy Elias's book, and, you know, do as much reading about the topic as you can, because you want to come in informed. But at the end of the day, it's always really important to have, you know, a professional help, you know, someone who knows what you're trying to do and who knows the industry, knows the government regulations, to really help you walk your way through the whole process, because you don't want to end up spending all this time and money, and in the end, you know, having all these problems that you wouldn't have if you had spent a little bit of money at the start to resolve all these issues. So I think we're just about out of time for today, but I'd like to quickly thank again Elias Eek from Enspyre, Henry Liao from Ecovis, and Mark Blackburn from Wraptie for taking the time out today, you know, giving us your insights and expertise. We really appreciate it. I would also like to thank some of our event partners, specifically the Canadian Chamber in Taipei. They're also doing a lot of other events, and they also work with the Dragons Chamber event, helping these SMEs. And of course, All Hands, who are doing a lot of work in the foreign employment space, and they run a lot of networking events that I would really recommend that you go to, just to meet other people who've opened up businesses, meet other foreigners who are working in Taiwan. If you're interested in finding out more about our speakers, don't worry, I'll be sending out a follow-up email with their contact details and today's slide and a recording of today's presentation. Alternatively, feel free to contact me, and I'm more than happy to put you in touch with today's speakers. So that's all we have for today. Thank you again, and thank you again to all our speakers.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.